Hi, Ryan.
Hello.
Great to have you.
Good to be here.
Before I let you shoot, I have to have a question. How can you be a revenue manager at a revenue management company? Can you put some light on your title?
Yeah, absolutely. So more specifically, I actually work with our expert services team, so I'm helping our clients revenue manage. And then on the back end as well, working with our own algorithm and processes in regards to revenue management. So
that means the overall revenue is managed by Ian, I guess.
Yeah, he does everything.
Good luck. Thank you.
Yeah, well, my name is Ryan Saylor, as we just mentioned, and I'm a revenue manager at Beyond Pricing. I work directly with our expert services team, and then also with revenue management in developing our product as well. So today I want to go over a couple different things and dive a little bit deeper into what hotels are currently doing. It's been great to see so far a lot of good content and people mentioning hotels here and there, because I think we have a lot to learn from what hotels have done over the past even 5 to 10 years. And then Ralph did a great job earlier going over a little bit of that timeline, hitting on some of early on what the airlines and hotels were doing as well. So I know the listed title for this presentation is pretty much a run-on sentence. There's a lot going on in there. But essentially what I'm going to take you through is day-to-day, what does a hotel revenue manager do? What are the tools they're looking at? What data do they have available? How have they refined that process? How have they brought in automation? How do they still keep a revenue management team? And how that looks across different hotels. There are, obviously different brands, different levels of service. So revenue management kind of directly correlates with that too. So I'll kind of go through a little bit there as well. So as I said, I'm currently with Beyond Pricing, but previously most of my experience has been in hotels since day one for me. So I started off with Starwood way back when, before the Marriott acquisition. I worked with the 2W properties in downtown Chicago doing revenue management kind of as a complex for both locations. So I saw kind of like big box urban downtown revenue management. They had a really awesome revenue management service or revenue management software at Starwood. So using that and seeing how it incorporated to a full team on property at a hotel, which you don't get at every property. A Hampton on the side of the road isn't going to have a dorm, a revenue manager, an analyst, a reservationist. They're not going to have that. So it's cool to see the top level and then kind of apply that to the rest of the industry as well. So more recently, I worked with a third-party revenue management company for hotels. We built our own software and then used that as a service as well with third-party franchise hotel owners. So that company was Korea RevGen, based out of Dallas, Texas. And the problem that we solved there was franchise hotel owners who own, let's say, a Hampton, a Fairfield, and a Holiday Inn. And they needed a point guy for revenue management. They needed their own software, but they weren't big enough to hire, their own person or, rely solely on the brands because of how dynamic their portfolio was. So that was really interesting to see kind of where hotels have evolved really throughout the revenue management process, and especially revenue management as a service. So I'll go through some of that today, and starting off, just kind of want to go through really what I'm calling like the landscape. So data that hoteliers use, both internal and external, market data in there as well. And then the process that a revenue manager would go through, whether that's day-to-day or on a weekly basis too. And some of that process is going to include the PMS, the RMS, a couple other different systems and tools that they typically use, and again have refined from the early days of pulling data from the PMS, putting it into Excel, and kind of going from there. That has changed a lot even just over the past 5 years, so we'll take a look at some of that as well. And then finally, the service part. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of different hotels across the world. There's those big boxes downtown, and then there's hotels on the side of the road. Everybody at this point pretty much has a revenue manager, and that wasn't the case necessarily 5 to 10 years ago. There was someone who probably had an idea or someone who pushed through the pricing, but now they've really built out options for every different size of hotel and especially every different owner as well. So we'll kind of go through the entire process here. So starting with that internal data, I wanted to start here because as a revenue manager going into any hotel, and same thing in the vacation rental industry, you have to know what data you have, what data is available, and also to make sure that it's as clean as possible. So starting with the property management system, revenue managers nowadays aren't in there as much. It's mostly used for operations, but revenue managers do need to know what is in there, is the data clean, is it good, what can they get from it, and how does it incorporate with more so a revenue management system. So I've got an example on the screen, popular property management system with hotels, Opera, just to give you an example of what they're collecting, basically by reservation. And the key thing here is to really understand what you're collecting at a reservation level. So if you can get for every single reservation 10, 20 data points, save that and store it, you're golden to start building your own database of data and using that to pull reports in the future to ultimately revenue manage your property. So a couple examples there of what they're pulling. Obviously, guest name, book date will help you get like booking data. You can pull company information, guest profiles. There's a ton in here. And really, I think one thing that hotel revenue managers learned is the more data you can put in here, the better, obviously, because in the future, you might not know what you need to be pulling. For example, you might in the future want to know company or business transient travelers who are booking on an OTA. How can you convert them to booking direct? You would be able to pull this data in here only if your front desk, for example, is adding that company profile into the PMS. So it's very important to kind of start here, and hotel revenue managers start here. Obviously, very incorporated in the vacation rental world as well, and very similar between both industries as well. So here you're also saving historical data. That's obviously very important as well. So having that kind of database of years of information for hotel is really, really key. I know if you're looking at just previous year's data for an event or something, that could be good year over year. Say last year the event didn't perform as well. Can you go back to the year before or even 5 years before to help you with forward-looking strategy? So that can be really, really important. And I've seen hotels either lose historical data or new hotels opening really, really struggle with forward-looking strategy and implementing that as a revenue management process without that data. So having it available is super, super important. And I want to reiterate that for vacation rentals because I've also seen people switching property management systems, not storing the data properly, not knowing how to store it or pull it for revenue management use. And that can really come back to haunt you in the future in just revenue management alone. So maintaining that is obviously very important. There's obviously benefits on the operational side as well, storing reservations, looking at forward-looking information as well. But for revenue management purposes, important to know what kind of data you can pull, and for hotels, keeping that historical data nice and clean. So also here I added sales, kind of touched on that earlier, but again, if you're auditing negotiated rates for corporate accounts and things like that, you're going to be pulling account production from the PMS, looking at that. They're essentially volume discounts, so you want to make sure companies are producing and you're tracking that first and foremost in the property management system. And then same thing with group business, whether that's recurring group business or just in general, looking at that as a segment, important to store here in the PMS as well. So a couple key things just as far as internal data for hotels and also external data. So hotels really keep their internal data close to their chest really. If you're looking at a hotel marketer or hotel comp set, no revenue manager is going to tell you their occupancy for a given night. It's part of their strategy, and it's harder to look at forward-looking market occupancy for a hotel compared to obviously a vacation rental listing. So a little bit of the external market data mostly comes from paid products and kind of the suite of products that you can build up and use for a hotel. So starting with Star, great to see them here. And actually a lot of people reference them so far. Very popular in the hotel world in terms of competitive benchmarking. Guaranteed every hotel, at least in the US right now, uses the baseline STR report, whether weekly or daily. There's an example on the screen of the monthly report actually. And the 3 key metrics that everybody should be looking at this point for hotels. I know we've talked about them as well for vacation rentals, but occupancy, ADR, revenue. Those are end all be all for revenue management in hotels and benchmarking against the rest of your comp set too. So like I said, most hotels at this point are using this report. Any hotel that isn't has already been told that they should be doing that, whether it's a brand standard or something that they've learned just through the years. STR has a couple other products as well, industry trends, what's coming in the pipeline in terms of supply for your market, all very good to know from STR. I threw in here the CVB calendar. This is just a little bit, market knowledge for a revenue management team. Sales would use that as well, but you're not really getting good data from it. You're just kind of understanding what's going on in the market, what could potentially draw spikes in demand to your hotel. And then finally, TravelClick. Definitely a big player in the hotel world. They have a massive suite of products. We have a lot of larger brands for hotels that incorporate this data into the PMS or their revenue management system. And I've got 3 of the popular tools that most hotels use up there. So Rate 360 is going to be that competitive set rate shop every single day or weekly or however a hotel is pulling it. And that's going to give you insight to what other hotels are charging in terms of rate. Someone mentioned earlier a really good point in looking at hotels' rates. A hotel might be selling, and you can pull their rate however you're pulling a rate shop. Say they're selling for $200, but they're actually performing at $100, coming in on the star report or something like that. That's always good to know. So you're never really looking at a hotel's rate as end-all be-all. That's what they're getting, that's what they're making, especially with how many rate plans and actual rates and discounting that hotels do, especially now. So definitely key for hotels to look at in terms of their comp set rates. Agency 360 is basically just travel agency production in a market. So this is really key for like stealing business transient accounts for hotels. You'll always hear sales at a hotel harp on, can we get this report? What can I steal and shift over from a different hotel? That'll give you that important data. And then Demand 360 is that forward-looking market occupancy demand. Obviously, all of TravelClick and STR is you have to pay for it. You can't get that for free at all. So getting that forward-looking data is super, super important. I know a lot of hotels that actually don't operate with a lot of that data. They kind of use their own booking pace and their own historical trends to, kind of conjure up what they're looking at in the future and not really what their competitors are building ahead of time. That can be kind of dangerous, and this product can give you that information to use into the future as well. And I think that's one of the big differences between hotels and vacation rentals is that forward-looking data and the availability of it. If you're looking at a hotel and you're shopping it for one night, you can see a rate available, and that could mean they have 1 room left to sell or 90% of their inventory available. You can't really tell. You just know a room is for sale, whether that's a different room type or whatever it might be. But obviously, if you pull up an Airbnb listing and it's not available on a certain date, it's not available, that's it. So that's a big difference in terms of reading data and revenue management strategy between the 2 industries that I noticed moving from hotels into this industry as well. So those are some data points in terms of internal and external that hotels use. Very similar to what vacation rentals use as well, and then kind of how hotels use this in their own processes moving forward is how things kind of start to differentiate. So more so into the process now of what revenue managers use. Starting with property management systems, as I said before, kind of early on in hotel revenue management, this was end-all be-all for revenue managers with hotels. They would get into the PMS. That's where they're yielding rates. That's where they're changing the daily rate. That's where they're kind of implementing their strategy and pushing those rates out. And pulling reports, whatever it might be, checking up on production, things like that, that would all happen within the PMS. More so, we're seeing that as just a tool for operations and revenue management operating elsewhere, but still good to know what you can pull there and kind of what's within these systems. So Opera is a big one. That's the one we saw earlier. Saber's got a couple solutions as well. Property management systems, there's a ton of them. It's the same thing in the vacation rental industry. Most of the big hotel brands, Marriott, Hilton, IHG, have all built their own, or they use a third-party one and just have contracts signed. I've seen independent hotels use Opera and pay for that. I've seen independent hotels build their own PMS, which I would never recommend. It's a terrible idea. It causes so many headaches, and you can kind of get what you want. Marriott built their own property management system, and they've been using it for 35 plus years, but they had the teams to actually do so. So there's a lot out there for hotels to use, and then also what the brands use as well. So guest profiles, keeping track of guest loyalty, things like that, obviously important. But we're seeing this now shift to central reservation systems for the big brands. A couple of years back, I'd say like 2013, 2014, there was a big push in a lot of the brands to really, kind of gather as much data for the guests and implement that into operations. So, you stay at a Marriott in Paris and you request 2 pillows to your room. You show up at this hotel and there's 2 extra pillows in your room. So that kind of synergy across the board shifted to the central reservation system for a lot of those big brands. Company profiles, again in here, just reiterating annual production. Sometimes for a hotel, business transient guests might be more than 50% of revenue. So it's really, really important to have that good, clean data starting from the PMS as well. Reservation level data, if you're not getting this from your PMS in a hotel or vacation rental PMS, you need to dig a little bit deeper and actually be able to have that. Anything you can get, but the most popular book date, stay date, ADR, source or channel is going to help you out a lot in the future in terms of revenue management strategy. And kind of going back to early on revenue managers only in a property management system. There is some good reporting in there. Sometimes it's okay. Sometimes you still use it or the front desk uses it. But for the most part now, a lot of that developed and kind of advanced reporting is going to be in the revenue management system that is being fed data from the property management system. So getting into the revenue management systems. Similar to PMSs, there's a ton out there. Probably some familiar names on the screens. Duetto, Ideas. OnQ is kind of Hilton's version. They also partnered with Ideas. IHG launched Concerto last year. So really all the big brands kind of do their own thing. And a couple of these systems operate differently. They have some general rules that they follow, but no system is the same. Every big brand over the past 10 years has wanted to build up their own, make it unique, obviously say it's the best. Some of them are great. I like using some of them. Some of them are overly complex and really, really difficult. And I'd say the biggest challenge for these revenue management systems is basically being accessible to multiple types of hotels. So Marriott launched one, for example, last year that was awesome if you were a JW Marriott in Times Square, but really, really complex if you're a Fairfield in a cornfield in Iowa. So it just kind of, that balance was really difficult to find. And I think a lot of these systems are still, kind of trying to get there. We've seen a lot of evolution over the past couple of years, which has been great. A lot of competition in the space, which is really, really cool. Still a lot of providers, and I think this is something that we're still going to see in the vacation rental industry in terms of evolution and newcomers as well. So digging into some of the basics of these systems. Revenue management systems ultimately have one goal. And I think kind of the unspoken rule of a lot of these, especially from the big brands, is to automate revenue management. Ralph talked about it earlier, and I totally agree. You really can't automate this process without human interaction right now. That's the biggest thing that hotels have been pushing for. Even with the evolution of hotel revenue management systems over the past 5 to 10 years, I have not seen a system that can do this. I can tell you no franchise owner would let a system take control of their entire revenue management strategy. So they're still looking for someone to jump in there and still have that human interaction and actually managing it. And even hotels still have a long way to go. So I think the vacation rental industry still has quite a ways to go as well. But the basics of these systems, I kind of broke it out here. Again, a lot of these systems are different, but I'll kind of touch on some high-level strategies that they like to implement. So starting with rates and yielding, basically the combination of those two is going to get you your day-level strategy. So with rates, it's what are you offering? What do you have to offer? What does the brand make you sell? What have you negotiated with everybody? And I'll kind of get into that in a minute as well. And then yielding. So how do you say what's available on any given day? How does that build into your strategy? You don't want to accept every rate every single day. That's how you revenue manage a hotel based on demand for any given day. So revenue management systems try to automate this as much as possible and then basically spit out a day-level strategy for a revenue manager to review. So that's the baseline of all of these systems. Again, they all still need human input right now. A lot of the brands have spent millions of dollars over the past couple of years to implement these and develop them a little bit more. A lot of them are very sophisticated, and we'll go through some examples here. So starting with the rates portion and digging into the rate side of revenue management systems. I think another key difference between hotels and vacation rentals is hotels can have hundreds of rates available on any given day. I've jumped into some revenue management for hotels and they just have a disgusting amount of rates, rate plans, rate codes, whatever you want to call it, going back 5, 10 years. So understanding that mix and what's available and what's actually loaded in the system is kind of a messy starting point for a lot of revenue managers jumping into hotel revenue management. So I broke down some of the kind of popular ones that you'll see. Best available rates, your bar, your retail rate, that's the most popular. If you're calling the hotel, if you're walking in, if you're online, that's what you're seeing, that's what you're paying. Most popular one, and that's kind of what everybody talks about when you ask, what's my rate tonight? What rate did you pay? What's the rate tomorrow? It's mostly going to be bar. So these are going to be direct reservations for a branded hotel or independent, calling in, booking on the website. Also very low cost. As hoteliers, they kind of want to drive more of these reservations just because they are a lower cost channel. And again, they're most popular. Most available, typically unfenced, available to all guests or people looking to book a hotel. So I have some examples there. A AAA discount, a standard rate, that's another name for bar or retail. A couple packages in there. So I'm sure you guys know when you book a hotel, you're kind of inundated with a lot of different rates, room types, and that whole matrix feeds into a bigger spread and a revenue management system. So another popular one, corporate rates. As I said before, some hotels do the majority of their business in business transient travelers. This hotel, for example, probably does quite a bit. So that can play a lot into revenue management strategy. And we've seen from the sales perspective, revenue management play a really big role in that. So obviously key to manage those in the revenue management system and account for them as part of that yielding process. These you're not really going to see online unless you're booking through a link, you're booking through the GDS, you're booking through your own company and getting it offered on a hotel. So it's a little bit more fenced and unavailable. And then there's some discounted rates in there, a lot of popular ones, AAA, AARP. Again, just minor discounts offered to certain guests booking a hotel. And then finally, third-party rates, so OTAs. I think if you go up to any hotel revenue manager and ask them how much OTA business they're doing, you're going to get yourself into a really interesting conversation. Obviously, you have to factor in commissions and fees. There's been a war the past 5 to 7 years between the big brands and OTAs. It's been actually kind of cool to watch and see how they do it. But seeing the back end of like Hilton negotiating with Expedia, like threatening to pull out inventory, it's been really, really cool. And it feeds into the rates that are available and yielding. And so kind of directly, indirectly, as someone booking a hotel, you might have experienced kind of how hotels have been dealing with that. But plays a really big role in the revenue management system and how they actually yield. So we'll get into that in a second here. But just on the OTAs as well, I mean, your big brands and even independent hotels have been fighting this battle for a while and really negotiating these rates. Some hotels, independent hotels, can do 80, 90% of their revenue every year from the OTAs. Obviously, that represents a big cost in commission and fees. And pretty much across the entire hotel landscape, we've seen owners and even just operational teams on the same page as this in terms of fighting the OTAs. As a revenue manager, I've seen a lot. I think a smart hotel owner understands the role of an OTA in the landscape. Someone who's a little bit less informed just wants to book direct all the time and really black out the OTAs or not give them any business. But they're definitely part of it, and hotels have spent years kind of dealing with this from the OTAs. So I think that's something moving forward we're going to see a lot, unfortunately. So I know there's ever-growing channels and more supply coming into pretty much every single market right now. And I'm not sure really where we're heading in terms of yielding. Obviously, it's a huge factor in hotels, but I think still in vacation rentals, we're focusing on what's our nightly rate, what's being offered for any given day, and not really how much does it cost to send this to a certain channel? How much more money am I making by getting a listing on my own website or just booking directly with a guest? So it plays a huge role in the hotel world and also in the yielding portion of a revenue management system. So the yielding side of it, pretty much 50% of a revenue management strategy. I always say that like pricing for hotels and talking about rates is kind of like the sexy part of it. Like an owner will come up to you and be like, what's our rate tonight? Should we go up? Should we come down? Like, what are we doing? When in reality, they should be asking, What's our mix of business? Like, how much am I paying Expedia? What do these invoices look like? So really digging into yielding is the second half of the battle alongside the type of rates that you're offering. So I've got a couple popular yielding techniques up here. A lot of the popular revenue management systems will use these. I broke out an example of pretty much the hurdle method, which is really effective in dealing with hundreds of rate plans for any given hotel, any given day. So this example here pretty much walks through someone who's looking to book, let's say tonight at this hotel, on 2 different channels. So the revenue manager at this hotel would say, I've got 2 variables. I'm going to determine my bar rate and what I'm typing into the revenue management system, and then also a hurdle point or a hurdle rate. So hurdle rate, I think, kind of more so in our terms, speaks to really just a minimum acceptable rate, a minimum rate for any given day. And that's fed into the revenue management system. So someone who goes to brand.com, for example, is offered $100 to book a room here tonight. Obviously on Marriott.com, owner of this hotel is only paying 3% or so commission to Marriott for that rate. Net rate comes out to, let's say, $97. That clears that $90 hurdle. The rate is available. Someone can book that and stay tonight. Same thing on Expedia. That same traveler goes to Expedia, books his hotel for tonight. It's $100. But from a revenue management perspective, I'm looking at that commission at 16%, a net rate at 84, and that's not clearing my minimum rate. That's not clearing my hurdle. I'm not selling tonight on Expedia. So this is a really, really easy way to understand how hoteliers actually deal with how many rate plans they have offered, how many commissions they've negotiated, what's available in the landscape, and ultimately how to drive more revenue. So this is why, as a consumer, you might be booking a hotel on Marriott.com that's not available on Expedia for a given night. This might bump you to say, stay 2 nights on Expedia, then you're clearing the hurdle. This is a really basic example. There's a lot of complex hurdle uses in the landscape right now. Marriott does quite a bit of cool stuff, actually. They dig more into channel costs, commission costs, and kind of factoring that in. And this is very normal in the hotel world right now with dealing with these types of rates. So that's a great way to handle revenue management strategy. The systems that do that are pretty advanced and effective in what they actually do. So those are some of the good ones. Hurdles can be determined by rate or revenue on a reservation. So that was kind of like a 1-night example, but say you're staying for 7 nights, that could be applied as your reservation revenue, just looking at a total revenue standpoint. But just a good example of hurdles, which is popular in quite a few of these revenue management systems. Stay restrictions are another big one, pretty much directly the same as vacation rental industries. For any given night, can we get away with this entire hotel, anybody who stays here tonight has to stay 2 nights, has to stay 3 nights. That's a pretty aggressive restriction. You're assuming that most of the demand is for a longer length of stay when we know most hotels, you kind of want to offer 1-night stays as well. So you can do that at the house level. House level just refers to every room, every rate plan, or you can do it at a rate level. So you can say for any of these corporate rates, you got to stay 2 nights. We always know corporate travelers, let's say here, stay on Tuesday and Wednesday. Can we get them in on Monday? Or is there enough demand to get people on Monday and help out that shoulder and really balance out your occupancy throughout the entire week? So that's a classic example, really easy to implement. Not as dynamic as like a hurdle strategy, but definitely effective in managing that revenue as well. So buckets or tiers are pretty straightforward too, built into a lot of PMSs as a basic revenue management strategy. Basically saying, once I get to a certain level of occupancy, let's crank rates up 10%, 20%. Kind of automation lets the revenue manager go to sleep at night and not have to worry about crazy demand coming in and booking, but also a really popular yielding technique as well. So just the overall process for hotels, kind of summing up what I just went over in terms of assessing market demand. First and foremost, hoteliers need to do that with the data that they have available. Booking pace and lead time, obviously important, and mix of business, super, super important. If you're doing a ton on the business transient side, you've got to work with sales. If you're doing a ton of OTA business, how can you cut down those commissions, et cetera, et cetera. Rate strategy, obviously factoring in just your bar rate in a given day. Your owner comes up, what are we selling at tonight? It's $100. Okay, great. But also your discounted rates that are available, and then with those large companies or even the OTAs, negotiating rates and commissions as well. And then your yielding strategy, pretty basic, high demand, strong pace, increase those rates, maybe throw a restriction in there. You're really just trying to push revenue. Low demand, open it up. What channel can we really optimize for who's actually booking for a given day? So now I want to go through some revenue management service. So this is what I was talking about earlier in terms of what hotels have picked up on and developed over the past couple years, just depending on the type of hotel and the need for revenue management service. So early on in revenue management days for hotels, it's kind of falling on the front desk in terms of revenue management, and then sort of the reservations team, and then a reservationist gets super overwhelmed, and that developed a need for revenue managers or a revenue management team. So now that kind of happened at larger hotels, and they were able to develop a team, bring someone on full time. But what about the little hotels? What about the independent, smaller hotels? Kind of what they did. So I've broken out 3 here. I'll go ahead and put all 3 up, but starting with brand revenue management, that's really, if you're franchising a Marriott, a Hilton, an IHG, a Hyatt, oftentimes your franchise agreement says you have to have revenue management. You have to have someone who's responsible for revenue management, whether that's a revenue manager, someone on your corporate team, someone on property. You have to have somebody. Most of the time, that's pretty loose. You can just have somebody with a title revenue manager. Sometimes they require that they do your revenue management, and you have to pay them a fee. Most of the fees for brand revenue management now are flat fees monthly, anywhere between $1,000 to $5,000 per month for branded revenue management. And for that, you're getting a remote revenue manager, you're getting biweekly or weekly calls, and some branded reporting, and someone who knows that system for the actual property. Some quick pros and cons of that. If you have someone, let's say a Marriott revenue manager working remotely for your property, they're going to be pro Marriott all the way. They're going to be like, I don't want to do any Expedia business. I don't want to talk to Booking.com. I don't want to do anything. We need to book direct or work on sales, whatever it might be. When in reality, you might have a really soft weekend where you can turn on Hotwire, throw a promo on Expedia, increase revenue. It can make it a little bit difficult when you're dealing directly with the brand in that case. Third party here really just refers to kind of that middle ground. That's the world that I previously worked in. So again, property management owners who own multiple franchises across different brands. If you've got that Holiday Inn, you've got the Marriott, you've got the Hilton, you don't want 3 different revenue managers for 3 different properties. You want one guy to talk to as an owner. You want agnostic reporting. You want someone who knows the ins and outs. And you want someone who would say, we need to throw a promotion on Expedia, or we need to really look at Booking.com and how to drive production there for these slow weekends or whatever it might be. That's kind of a benefit of that middle ground third-party revenue management service. So that's kind of what's developed over the past couple years, that third-party space for hotel franchise owners, which has been really cool to see and is kind of developed right now in the space. And then finally, just an internal team. This is pretty straightforward, but obviously not everybody can afford this. So that's the biggest downside, is these small hotels, one-off independents, might not be able to bring on a full-time revenue manager. They might go to a third-party service or something like that. But if they can, they're using their own on-site revenue manager. Maybe they're building their own reporting, or likely in this day and age, actually reaching out to a third-party service like Duetto or Ideas and pulling them up for revenue management reporting and service. So that's some highlights on revenue management service. And I kind of want to finish up with just a general outlook for vacation rentals and revenue management compared to hotels. So with data, we're talking a lot about this. This is a high-level summary, but internal, you've got your guest data, booking pace, and PMS data. If you're not familiar with that, if you don't know what you can pull from your PMS or what you're actually storing and can potentially use, get familiar with it. If you're shopping around PMSs, that is information that you need to know from the revenue management perspective. Obviously, other factors come in there too, cost, operational use, things like that. But from a revenue management perspective, that's what you want to know. And then external, that forward-looking market data is a lot more available with vacation rental listings just naturally due to the supply compared to hotels, which is great, definitely a benefit over hotels that this industry has. In terms of process, we're still seeing ever-evolving revenue management systems. They're getting better and better day by day. We're seeing newcomers come into the space and still just developing those systems more and more day to day for use in the future. Same thing with property management system integrations, simpler integrations, bringing up those outdated systems to more modern day uses to make all of our jobs easier. And then finally, service. I think this is a key one, but hotels really figured out how to get everybody a revenue manager. Through those 3 levels of service and through easy access to relatively inexpensive revenue management systems, they were able to do that. So I think with vacation rental industry, we're really going to see the proliferation of someone who does revenue management. At Beyond Pricing, I always hear our team asking clients, who does your pricing? Who does revenue management? It's kind of like, oh, this person, or oh, so-and-so. It's never, oh, this guy's our revenue manager. This is our director of revenue management. And yeah, that can feed into just smaller companies not having the resources to do so, but you still want someone who can answer to those questions, especially with how the landscape has been evolving over the past couple of years. And then finally, really just developing revenue management as a cornerstone. Obviously, we're at this conference. It's pretty indicative of where revenue management is heading. I think we have a lot to learn from airlines and hotels. Hopefully, I was able to provide some insight to what hotels have done over the past even just 5 to 10 years, where they're heading, and then where we're heading as well. So I do want to open it up to a couple questions here, if anybody has some. I think we've got mics out in the audience for anything.
Thank you very much, Ryan.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Does anybody have questions out there? And if not, I'm happy to break the ice.
Yeah.
Are we going to have a war with our OTAs as well?
Yes.
Okay, tell us about it.
It's coming. Be ready. Have your data available, and know your position. Obviously, building up any sort of direct channel that you can is really, really beneficial. But being able to sit down at a table with any sort of channel provider and have the data to back up where you're heading and kind of what you can be doing on your own without that channel is first and foremost important. But we're definitely heading that direction.
But would you agree with me that it's a different type of war, right? I mean, obviously in terms of the brands, and especially in North America, I mean, Europe is different, where we have a lot more boutique hotels and smaller hotels and less chains and whatever their dependency on OTAs is still a lot larger. So how does our war look like? Because obviously, you know, we're trying to build scale, but, you know, even with the Vacasa plus 20,000 properties, if you look at the entire market and the available market and the respective market share, it's still tiny, and that doesn't give you the muscles to sit down with Expedia and say, you know, well, screw you, we go direct. So that's not going to happen, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think hotels kind of built up to that point, but they had the big brands behind them. They had these big brands that had grown up and did have that power to go to them and say that. So I think it is going to be a slower roll, and part of it's going to be reliant on building up direct channels. Can you afford to get on a website? Can you afford to be a part of a larger property management group? What can you kind of build up on your own? But that's going to be a lot slower just out of, you know, the nature of the industry right now.
Absolutely, but that's going to be a super big challenge, because obviously if you're an OTA and realize that your revenue is coming down from the hotel piece, you're investing a lot more in private accommodation, say, okay, that's where I can get a lot of revenue done, and obviously put more pressure on and get that product out there at a higher commission to sort of compensate what they're losing the hotel space. So that goes totally against us in midterm, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I'm not saying that hotels are going to be fully off the OTAs. It has been, I think, a good war in the end. Hotels were able to drive down commissions, and OTAs were able to maintain the revenue that they were getting. So I think it is, you know, beneficial for everybody, but it is a war, and it wasn't pretty over the past couple of years just to see that. Absolutely. And what hotels had to do.
Now, one thing that is interesting to me as well is that in the comparison to the hotel industry is that there's always still human intervention, right? And everybody's now talking about, we used to talk about big data, now we talk about AI, artificial intelligence. What role is AI going to play in the revenue management space, and will it ever be driverless?
I think a lot of people like to talk about AI and like to say that they use it every day and we're seeing it grow here and here and here. But really that human element and that human piece is still going to be such a cornerstone in the industry and using all these softwares and all these systems. And part of that speaks to just the nature of how people book and really what we're looking at in terms of demand. And part of that is just using older systems that have a long way to come until we even get to that point in terms of integrations or scaling up PMSs or things like that. So I think we're still relatively a ways away, but there are kind of companies here and there chipping away at the potential for that. But hotels are still very far away, and I think the vacation rental industry is even just a little bit behind them as well.
I was wondering about that because one of your, I'll be with you in 1 second. One of your screenshots showed a screenshot from 2010, right?
Yeah.
So that's like 9 years ago in the hotel industry. You didn't want to embarrass us, so you used the 10-year-old slide to show us, or?
I think that was the STR data slide from like 2014. That was the only one I could find without digging into like actual hotel data.
Thanks.
Still recent though.
Hi, Christina Thorson, Chattanooga Vacation Rentals. One of the things I heard you allude to that I'm aware of as hotels is that they can turn on and off channels. We don't really have that ability that I'm aware of. Can you speak to that for the vacation rental industry?
Yeah, that's one thing that kind of going through the hotel revenue management process, hotels don't really turn it on and off. I would always work with owners like, turn off Expedia, we gotta turn the faucet off, like close them out. With the landscape that's built up today, that's not really possible, but you can yield there. You can say that's where that yielding comes into play and really starts to help you drive more revenue. And someone alluded to it earlier, but the OTAs are aware of that too. And you actually will see your ranking drop or lower based on your rates and availability. So speaking to parity and just inventory availability. What we saw in the big brands from the direct booking war was the introduction of member rates. Member rates put every big brand property out of parity with the OTAs, but didn't really have an impact because every big brand was doing it, so they all dropped, and it was like maybe a couple independent hotels up there. But OTAs thought that would be a punch in the gut, and it really wasn't. So you can, effectively slow it down or turn it up via yielding, but that's how you do so, through the OTAs and kind of use that to your advantage.
Maybe I throw in the last question in terms of there's a lot of vendors here, suppliers such as you as well, and you knowing the hotel tech space very well. And we talk a lot about convergence of the actual product. So the hospitality product is converging, hotels going into the SDR, and obviously we have now other companies like Stay Alfred and Sonder who are moving into the hospitality space as well, and vacation rental will be soon to be considered hospitality too, if not already. What does that mean for the technology side? I was always wondering then, if you look at the fragmented landscape of PMSs in the hotel industry or CRSs and also revenue management tools, do you think these guys will also move into the vacation rental space? In terms of logic, there's a few differentiations which you have pointed out, but it surprises me that these hotel technology companies are not moving into this space while the space is obviously massive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think part of that feeds into the fact that with the rise of Airbnb and vacation rentals in general, hotels early on weren't worried. I would go to hotel conferences and they'd be like, don't worry about vacation rentals, don't worry about Airbnb, we don't have to deal with it. They're not taking away business travelers, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, more recently, we've seen some introduction of, okay, actually we need to step into the space a little bit more. They're an actual real competitor. And I think that will feed into kind of the competition within the space and what those even software providers start to do from the hotel world. So I think that'll come alongside with Marriott getting into the same space, Hilton buying up companies and getting into the vacation rental space. We'll see those providers follow suit. But first, it's going to be the brands exploring that a little bit further and everybody else following after that as well.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, ever-changing industry. Thank you, Ryan Saylor.
Thank you.